I know that Audrey's eyes were half-turned, and her chin was slightly raised. She happily cast her gaze diagonally across her, towards a stone pillar that supported the dome. She quickly withdrew her gaze, ready to admire the reaction of Mr. Hanged Man after he heard the answer. Force vaguely realized one thing: the so-called Roselle's diary can be exchanged with Mr. Fool for answers to certain questions, and maybe even some items. Roselle's diary? Is it referring to the notes that are written with Roselle's unique symbols that no one can interpret? They were actually diary entries? Mr. Hanged Man's tone sounded very firm, and Mr. Fool didn't retort him. I've encountered many, but I've never bought any of them because I wasn't interested. Ah, yes, Miss Audrey has quite a few. She's a fanatic when it comes to this. But that dog of hers last week, no, maybe last week, I don't remember it too well basically, it tore up many books and notes, including all of the diary entries from Emperor Roselle. The sudden surprise and disappointment that emerged had filled her heart and made her want to raise her hands, cover her ears, and scream. That wasn't enough to express her current feelings. I hate dogs, Force bitterly thought. The Hanged Man's request was somewhat beyond Klein's expectations. However, it was the easiest for him to complete. He chuckled and said, sure. Do you want everyone to hear it, or do you want to be the only one to know it? Alger replied without hesitation, only myself. He didn't have the spirit of selfless devotion to others. Klein laughed and blocked the senses of the other members, which made Miss Justice very upset. She was waiting to see Mr. Hanged Man's stunned and shocked expression, as though she had done something great herself. Although she couldn't proclaim it out loud, she still looked forward to the subsequent reaction after Mr. Hanged Man knew the answer. But now, the detestable Hanged Man has deprived me of this happiness. Audrey grumbled inwardly. Of course, she was very clear that his request was absolutely justified. But I already know the answer, she pursed her lips and thought. At this moment, Klein leisurely flipped over the card of blasphemy and held it vertically, allowing the Hanged Man to directly see the black-armored, crowned, and caped Rossel. It was common to see the portrait of Emperor Rossel, so Alger recognized him immediately. More importantly, there was a clear sign on the card saying, Sequence 0, Dark Emperor. Indeed, it's the rumored deck of cards, which contains the Paths of the Divine, made by Emperor Rossel. It's the original prototype of tarot cards. Sequence 0, Dark Emperor. Is this the lawyer pathway to becoming divine? Mr. Fool has been collecting Roselle's diary all this time, apparently in order to find clues to this deck of cards, and in a matter of months. He has already acquired one. Alger was surprised and delighted, as well as excited and agitated. All of a sudden, he inexplicably felt that the future of the tarot card was incomparably bright. Previously, he had only been intimidated by the mysteriousness and potency of Mr. Fool, and he had only held the notion of using the tarot club to exchange information and goods. But now, he began to think of the advantages that he and the other members could reap when Mr. Fool managed to collect all of Emperor Rosselle's cards. At that time, the tarot club might become the most powerful secret organization. Alger couldn't help but look forward to the future. Then Klein said slowly, a card of blasphemy. He then immediately removed the isolation barrier. As soon as she regained her senses, Justice Audrey immediately turned her gaze towards the Hanged Man. Through the blurred image, she could vaguely read the remaining shock, joy, and yearning from the other party. That's more like it. Audrey was immediately greatly satisfied. A card of blasphemy indeed, it's related to the blasphemy slate. Alger bowed his head in thought for a few seconds and began to conjure the 3 pages of Roselle's diary. Soon, the 3 yellowish-brown goatskin parchments were in Klein's hands. He casually lowered his gaze and started reading at a moderate pace. The 15th of March, I really am the protagonist. With just some archaeological clues and folklore, I found a ghost ship left behind by the Solomon Empire in the Fog Seas boundary at the Auric Archipelago, the Dark King. It's really cool. There are some ancient books on it, including a treasure map pointing to some nameless island. That's the final settlement of a great noble of the Solomon Empire who was defeated and left the northern continent. Everything that he left behind is there. This treasure will definitely belong to me. The 19th of March, after much deliberation and consideration, I finally decided to set out on a long voyage. After that, I'll enter the Royal Army as an officer, so it will be hard for me to have an opportunity such as this again. Edwards and Grimm are willing to take the risk and follow me into that foggy sea. Actually, I don't just want the treasures. I also wanted to verify something, from the sun, the red moon, to the trajectory of the stars in the sky, as well as the changes in 4 seasons. All sorts of signs and different data to prove that the world I'm on should be a planet. In that case, it shouldn't only be the northern and southern continents. Based on the various data, the land mass occupied by the 2 continents totaled up isn't even a tenth of the planet's surface area. Could the rest of it be the sea and islands? To the west of the northern and southern continent is the Fog Sea. To the east is the Sonya Sea. I suspect that there are other continents at the end of these 2 seas, just like how the southern continent is at the end of the Berserk Sea. Maybe I can find the brand new continent, the western continent. Let's go. Great Seafarer Rossel Columbus Magellan Gustave, go and verify your conjecture. The Emperor Shaw was reckless when he was young. He actually dared to go on a voyage just because he received a treasure map that he had no clue about its authenticity, or if it held any danger. No, he's as rash as he was when he was young, even in his old age. The cards of blasphemy are evidence of this. Klein couldn't help but lampoon. The diary entry seems to be linked to a page or 2 that he had seen before, separated by at most 1 or 2 other diary entries. So Klein was almost certain that Rossel had lost his way this voyage and ended up finding a primitive island just outside of the safe sea routes. On it, there were a number of beyonder creatures. In the process, he had also teased Grimm and Edwards, who were following him to sea, using the memes of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse and the Pirate King. In addition, Grimm, who had been praised by Rossel as the smartest of them all, became increasingly stranger after discovering the primitive island, and he ended up dying in the Fog Sea. Speaking of which, the idea that the world is a planet is now widely accepted and confirmed by astronomy. Klein turned to the 2nd page of the diary. The 18th of April, I discovered the term Western Continent in an ancient book on the Dark King. There really is a Western Continent. However, even during the 4th epoch, in the Solomon Empire, when the gods were still walking the lands, the Western Continent was only a rumor. Legend has it that it was the homeland of the elves, and it was related to the ancient god named Sonithrim. The problem with that is that the elves ended up on Sonia Island and later scattered themselves over the mountains and the numerous islands in the seas, and there is no legend that they have ever tried to return to their homeland. In short, the end of the Fog Sea might be the western continent, the homeland of the elves. Then, what's at the end of the Sonia Sea? Is there really an eastern continent? Where is it hidden in the books of myths? Could it be the ethereal forsaken land of the gods? Proceed onward, Russell. You're about to reach your destination. The western continent, the eastern continent. Russell guessed that the latter might be the forsaken land of the gods, yes. Mr. Hangman once said that many members of the Aurora Order were searching the Sonia Sea for the true creator's holy residence. And he suspects that the holy residence is the forsaken land of the gods. This is in line with Emperor Russell's thoughts. This world has many secrets. Klein lowered his gaze towards the last few paragraphs of the page. The 20th of April. All signs indicate that we're about to reach a continent, not the land from an island. There's actually a benefit to being lost. Could it be that I've discovered the so-called western continent? The 21st of April. I saw the abyss. Abyss. Did Russell see the abyss? The abyss in the sense of mysticism? Klein's pupils shrank as he quickly turned the page. But the third page of his diary made him doubt his life and his many years of Chinese education. It was filled with the following sentences: FK hungry, please people in manner. This Klein realized that this was probably a subsequent forgery of Russell's diary entries. They had randomly pieced together a bunch of sentences based on the original symbols. At this moment, Klein felt like he was seeing intelligible characters and had the urge to curse those forgers. He wanted to know if the abyss mentioned in Russell's diary was the abyss to which the terms source of evil, band of corruption, and home of devils refer to. The true abyss is the dark side of the universe, where even gods can be corroded. It should be independent from the real world, just like the spirit world. At the very least, this is what the Book of Secrets and the books which I came into contact with during my time with the Nitorks say if it's not the true abyss. Then what did the Emperor mean by abyss? Klein thought about it, over and over again, but was unable to come up with an explanation. He felt extremely dissatisfied, just like when a novel was dropped by the author at the most critical moment. With a single glance, he calmed down and let the diary entries disappear from his hands. You can begin. Sitting at the head of the long bronze table, he chuckled. Alger turned his head immediately towards the sun, asking indifferently, "Have you gotten anything from the former captain of that exploration team?" Derek was originally anxious to ask about the fallen creator, but when he heard the hanged man's question, he answered honestly, "He's dead." He's dead, Justice. The hanged man and the magician expressed their surprise at the same time. They really didn't expect this turn of events. After all, the former captain of the exploration team had been locked up for decades without any problems. Who would have thought that he would die right after they discussed about him? At this moment, aside from Mr. Fool, only the gloomy and reserved world maintained his original state. Derek nodded and said, "Yes. After I returned to the City of Silver, I wanted to glean more information from the former captain using Mr. Hanged Man's suggestions, but he suddenly appeared behind me, asking me if I was looking for him." Upon hearing this, Audrey suddenly drew a short breath. Although the son obviously lacked the ability to tell a good story, his simple descriptions still gave her the feeling of reading horror novels late into the night. It was as if someone was standing behind her, also asking, "Are you looking for me?" Force was as frightened as she was excited, having found the feeling she had as a child listening to her mother's recount of a ghost story. Despite covering her ears in fear, it felt like someone had possessed her and pried open the gaps between her fingers, allowing the voice to be transmitted into her brain. This passage can be written into a novel. As a best-selling writer, she had outstanding professional instincts. Alger, being experienced and knowledgeable, subconsciously asked, "Doesn't your City of Silver's dungeon have seals targeting rampagers? Is there no barrier between them? I remember that last time you said that there was a very powerful and mysterious item at the core." "Yes, but I don't know how or why he came to my room." He had completely lost control of himself, his head had split open in the middle and fluid kept flowing out. There were many cracks on his body, and each crack was a mouth, Derek said, describing the scene in passing. "Then, how did you survive? How did you escape from his, no, it's Jaws?" Force felt immersed, and it was also a question which Audrey was concerned about. Alger's reaction was very different from theirs. He thoughtfully murmured, "It doesn't make sense to put you, a person who only shows signs of losing control, next to such a dangerous fellow. From the looks of it, the upper echelons of your City of Silver, the members of the 6-member council, deliberately made you interact with him, hoping to gather useful information from him and observe any corresponding changes. So, which elder saved you?" Derek's mouth gaped a little, feeling as if Mr. Hanged Man had personally seen and heard everything that had happened. Just based on the situation I described, he was able to guess the truth. "How amazing," Derek answered with admiration. "Yes, just as you said, the chief appeared just in time and used the mystical item to deal with the rampager." Noticing the respect and admiration from the son, Alger let out a chuckle. "It's quite an obvious case. As long as one is experienced enough, you'll easily be able to notice this." "I didn't think of it," Audrey muttered to herself, somewhat depressed. "I couldn't tell." Force ran her hand through her hair, ashamed. "I didn't think in that direction," the world repeated Mr. Fool's sigh. After saying that, Alger frowned slightly and slowly asked, "You said that not long after you returned, the former captain of the exploration team lost control." "He didn't lose control for decades, but he suddenly lost control after you returned." At the same time, Mr. Hanged Man raised his head and looked at Mr. Fool. Seeing that Mr. Fool was very calm and without any hint of abnormalities, his mood immediately eased. All the uneasiness he had just now turned into questions. The Amon family is known as blasphemers. Could it be that that person discovered the Tarot Club and the secret above the grey fog, but he was easily finished off by Mr. Fool? Derek nodded seriously and said, "I guess 2 reasons. One was because I chose the sun pathway, and you said that the Amon family was the descendant of an ancient sun god. The other reason is that he noticed that Mr. Fool was pulling me in to attend the gathering, so changes happened to him, and it was proven to be the latter." "How was it proven?" Alger pressed, leaving no stone unturned. "Someone sensed that Mr. Fool was pulling him in to attend the gathering." "Someone can really detect it?" How terrifying as expected of a blasphemer, Audrey was astonished and shocked. She couldn't help but glance at the end of the long bronze table, and she was immediately comforted by Mr. Fool's calm and indifferent attitude. It's just a trivial matter. To Mr. Fool, it's just a trivial matter, Audrey thought with joy and relief. So it turns out that someone is able to discover the Tarot Club's gathering as expected, with so many pathways and so many sequences. There will always be a beyond a power that can detect this, but for me right now, this is a very bad thing. I'm still too weak. I have to advance my sequence as soon as possible. Force was momentarily surprised and frightened. Derek truthfully described the events. I saw Eamon's shadow when the rampager was finished off by the chief. It should be him. This is what he looks like. With the approval of Mr. Fool, Derek conjured a light screen depicting Eamon. A black classic robe, a matching pointed hat, a crystal monocle, a broad forehead, a thin face, black eyes, black curly hair. Have any of you seen him before? Derek asked hopefully. The Hanged Man, Justice, the Magician, and the world shook their heads in unison. Without harping on the matter, Derek continued. Eamon's shadow was eliminated by the chief with the help of the mystical item, leaving being a translucent worm. The chief told me that it was only an avatar of Eamon. He explained to me the reason for arranging it, so I lived beside him. After confirming that I was fine, he allowed me to return home. I was a little afraid, unaware of any subsequent actions Eamon might take. Therefore, the moment I reached home, I prayed to Mr. Fool. Wait, Alger interrupted the son with a frown. You said that you just experienced such a strange and terrifying incident, and the chief let you go home just like that. And the moment you returned home, you didn't do anything but first pray to Mr. Fool. Yes, Derek answered blankly. What's wrong with that? He found Mr. Hangman's attitude rather odd. Audrey vaguely felt that what the son had done wasn't right, but she couldn't immediately figure out what was wrong. She just believed that if she were in his shoes, she definitely wouldn't have done that. But at that very moment, force had already covered her face. Too careless I was like that in the past, and the price of that was to use up a stone on my bracelet and start bearing the curse of the full moon, the best-selling writer side in her heart. Alger glanced at Mr. Fool again. Seeing that he remained indifferent, he forced himself to relax. He held his fist against his nose and said, after having such an interaction with that strange Eamon, do you think the chief will adjust to a cursory inspection and be completely reassured about you? If that's really the case, that former captain of the exploratory team wouldn't have been imprisoned for 42 years. In my experience, the chief has definitely sent someone to secretly monitor you, and you've undoubtedly exposed your own uniqueness. Don't doubt this. If the chief isn't that careful, then there's no way your city of Silver can last till this day under such abject environments. This Derek's eyes widened, being even more convinced that Mr. Hanged Man was truly knowledgeable and that what he said made a lot of sense. The chief discovered something abnormal about me. So, that's why he had such an attitude when he heard my report. What should I do? What should I do? Derek immediately became nervous and frightened. Noticing his concern, Alger scoffed. However, you don't have to worry about it for now. I just thought about it. Even if your city of Silver's chief found out about your abnormality, he would only suspect that you were possessed by Eamon, that you've been contaminated by him, and wouldn't think of the Tarot Club. You still have time, so you can slowly think of a way to resolve this problem. Derek calmed down a little and honestly said, back then, I really was possessed by Eamon. What? Alger blurted out. He nearly left his seat, taking on a combat stance to fend off any accidents. Audrey and Force immediately tensed up. Only the gloomy world showed mere surprise. Startled by the reaction of Mr. Hanged Man, Derek quickly added, Mr. Fool discovered it while I was praying. As he spoke, he conjured the scene which Mr. Fool had sent to him back then. Dressed in a pointed hat and a crystal monocle, Eamon's illusory figure was coiled around his spirit body like the ghost of a python. Seeing Justice and Magician trembling from the bottom of their hearts, the Hanged Man immediately pressed on. What happened next? Later, Mr. Fool taught me a ritual. Through the ritual, he sent his angel to purify Eamon's avatar, Derek replied without embellishing or simplifying anything. Angel? The Hanged Man looked in shock at the end of the bronze table. He hurriedly lowered his head when he realized that his actions were impulsive and impolite. Angel? Audrey was momentarily left dazed. After a brief moment of blankness, Audrey quickly understood what the son was saying. He was saying that Mr. Fool had sent his angel to purify Eamon's avatar. Angel. Mr. Fool sent an angel. Mr. Fool really has an angel as an attendant. Every angel has at least the power of a sequence too. Although that's expected, and I've already expected it, it's still amazing because it has finally been verified. And only deities can control angels. Audrey's eyes shone with excitement. She couldn't help but wonder what Mr. Fool's angel looked like. I wonder if I'll be lucky enough to see that. She looked towards the end of the long bronze table with admiration and zeal. At the same time, her spiritual perception told her that Mr. World, who was always gloomy, had also sat up straight in shock, which pleased her inexplicably. Force recalled what had happened to her previously. She had only asked Mr. Fool to interfere with any divinations, and she ended up seeing a 12-winged archangel descend, enveloping her spirit body with its wings. It really was an angel black wings, an archangel with 12 pairs of wings, and this really is just a routine procedure from Mr. Fool. He would send an angel to help members of the gathering get out of trouble. Force suddenly didn't dare to look up at the gentleman who was sitting leisurely at the end of the long bronze table. Although she was still only sequence 9, and she hadn't received a complete education in the field of mysticism, she had been involved with different beyond circles for 3 years. She would have learned of certain things even if she didn't deliberately find out about them. In the midst of all of this, there was a very important clause: you may not look directly at God. In the past, this sentence didn't leave much of an impression on Force, but now she suddenly felt that it was the truth derived from countless bloody lessons. Angel, Mr. Fool really does have an angel by his side. The Hanged Man felt a wave of fear and baffling excitement hit him, causing his body to tremble slightly. Previously, when he told us his honorific name and responded to prayers and rituals, this had indirectly expressed the notion that Mr. Fool was equivalent to a god. However, direct evidence was still lacking. But now, an angel has appeared. The existence of that alone is enough to explain many things. Amongst them, the most important thing is that angels represent the most direct form of deterrence. Mr. Fool is not without influence in the real world. Even if he doesn't go through his adorers, he can still project his majesty onto a certain region. Alger immediately thought of many things. He broke into a cold sweat for his shallow actions in the past, while feeling filled with hope for the future. Immediately following that, he started to think about the details of what the sun had said. Mr. Fool didn't let the angel descend directly. Instead, he taught the sun a ritual. Through that ritual, he sent the angel to purify Amon's avatar. That's quite a roundabout way of doing things. Does this mean that in order to influence the real world, Mr. Fool must break through many obstacles? This is consistent with my earlier judgment that he is in a sealed and confined state, or perhaps there's something special about the forsaken land of the gods. The reason why Mr. Fool didn't act like this before was because he has escaped a little. He is gradually freeing himself. Sitting at Mr. Fool's seat, Klein slowly looked around. He was obviously aware of Miss Justice's reverence and zeal, as well as the fear and excitement of the hanged man. Weren't you always treating me like a god in the past? Why are you acting like this after hearing about the angel? It seems like indirect evidence ultimately cannot be compared to the shock and awe delivered by direct evidence. If a new member were to question me in the future, I would make preparations in advance for the world to step forward and say something. Then, I would casually point my finger and kill him as an example to others. Once things calmed down, I would make anew the world. Klein's thoughts gradually wandered. Derek didn't quite understand the reactions of Mr. Hanged Man and Miss Justice. From his point of view, wasn't it normal that an angel served a god or almighty existence? After pondering for a few seconds, he said, after Amon's avatar was purified, I coughed out a worm that was exactly identical to the one in the dungeon. Do you know what it is? With the help of Klein's help, the sun successfully conjured a projection of a translucent worm with 12 transparent rings. Ori and Force looked over curiously. At the same time, they shook their heads, indicating that they had never seen or heard of this kind of worm. 12 rings in the Book of Secrets, all similar symbols have something to do with time. The Amon family was descended from an ancient sun god, and in ancient times, people believed that the sun and time were related. This can barely be considered an explanation and can be verified from two angles, however. Why is it that the current eternal blazing sun is the inextinguishable light, embodiment of order, god of deeds, and guardian of businesses? But he doesn't seem to be involved in the domain that deals with time in order to maintain his image as the fool. Klein was in no hurry to answer. He smiled, his gaze warm. Alger thought for a moment before saying, it should be the vessel that Amon created for his avatar. In legends, there is a type of worm that looks similar, appearance-wise. They have 12 transparent rings and are called worms of time. However, no one has ever seen them before. Many people suspect that it's actually the name of a sequence potion. Worm of time, so it's very close to my guess. Although this is just a legend spread among beyonders at the middle echelons of particular churches and above, the information itself is of great value. Is Mr. Hanged Man saying this out loud to let others know this because he has been rewarded, having learned a lot of important information from the sun? Klein felt wistful and amused at the same time. Worm of time, the vessel that Amon created for his avatar, Derek whispered to himself, as though he had resolved many of his doubts. He curiously asked, what can it be used for? I mean, when it's dead. I don't know. Faced with the sun's trust and respectful gaze, Alger suddenly felt a little ashamed. At that moment, the fool, who was sitting at the very end of the long bronze table, spoke calmly, the main material of certain rituals. This was what Klein had surmised from the contents of the Book of Secrets. However, he wasn't worried that he would say anything wrong, because it was almost impossible to prove it. Failing to find the ritual that requires a worm of time just serves to prove that you're not knowledgeable enough. Klein casually added inwardly. Certain rituals Ori and the others instantly let their imaginations run wild. Thank you, the great Mr. Fool. Derek got up halfway and bowed. Following that, the topic steered towards the matter that threatened the existence of the City of Silver. The exploratory team is back. I'm referring to the team led by Shepard Eldelavia. They completed the exploration of the fallen creator's half-destroyed temple and have returned to the City of Silver. And I discovered that a few of the team members that I know have undergone a certain degree of change. They've been corrupted by the true creator. Alger didn't hesitate to point that out with a tone of certainty. The true creator. Audrey couldn't help but look at the end of the bronze table. She remembered very clearly that the true creator had once had its descent foiled by Mr. Fool's Adora. She had even guessed that the leader of their tarot club was going to be the nemesis of evil gods. Really? Derek returned, refusing to believe it. The Hanged Man calmly said, describe their changes in detail. I still feel like he's the same person, but he's very different from before. His original optimism has now turned heavy. There's only a polite smile left from his former bright smile. Derek shared everything abnormal that he had discovered, including the sudden improvement in Shepard Eldelavia's state. Alger said in deliberation, the situation might be worse than you think. Corruption could be the best possibility. Now, if they truly believe, from the bottom of their hearts, in the true, fallen creator, that would be trouble, and they would be irredeemable. Regardless, their characters, thoughts, and viewpoints would all be warped, turning into hidden lunatics. You can take action from this angle, letting other members of the six-member council notice that something is amiss. I've already reported the matter, but the chief doesn't seem to trust me too much, Derek said in a slightly aggrieved and heavy manner. Force couldn't help but sigh. That's because your chief is suspecting that you're possessed by Amon and planning something nefarious against the City of Silver. Then, what should I do? Even if I told them of the existence of the fallen creator, they wouldn't believe me, am I right? Derek asked anxiously. The Hanged Man pondered for 2 seconds before saying, in truth, your chief should have begun paying attention to the Shepherd and the exploratory team members. For your City of Silver to survive to this day, the upper echelons will definitely have the most basic level of vigilance and not neglect any possible threats. The only problem is that the importance they place on this matter is definitely insufficient. At the very least, it's not as important as their attention on you and Amon. Without waiting for the sun to speak, he added after some deliberation. Perhaps you can use this incident to wipe away the suspicion on you. Find an opportunity to make a particular exploratory team member to show the most thorough extent of an abnormality and enter into a conflict with him. That way, the other members of the six-member council will notice that something isn't right and raise the priority on this matter. At the same time, hand over the suspected worm of time and say that you suddenly felt your mind be adrift while the conflict was happening and that you had no idea what happened. You only vaguely heard someone shouting "True Creator" before you woke up. And by then, you had already coughed out the worm. When an evil god is involved, there are many means and abilities that one wouldn't dare use without thought. Your chief would adhere to logic and guess that Amon's avatar and the mental corruption left behind by the True Creator had entered into conflict, eventually being destroyed and reduced to a dead worm. The surveillance on you would definitely decline significantly. If you act normally for an additional period of time, then the suspicion placed on you will be completely gone. Why does Mr. Hanged Man seem so well versed in this aspect? Audrey thought with her mouth slightly open. Derek's eyes lit up when he heard this, and he felt that Mr. Hanged Man was indeed trustworthy. He had come up with such a good idea. Then, how do I make that exploratory team member display the most thorough extent of his abnormality? He quickly asked. Alger fell silent for a few seconds before saying, I don't know. He then added, it would be great if there are items related to the True Creator. With a whoosh, Audrey looked towards the fool who was seated at the end of the long bronze table. Klein knew very well why Miss Justice was looking at him. Being aware of the Lanivas incident, she was certain that he had many conflicts, both in the open and in the shadows, between himself and the True Creator, and that it was normal for him to have the corresponding items, perhaps even quite a few of them, in his possession. Logically speaking, there's nothing wrong with her thinking. In fact, I have crossed the True Creator several times, and I do have an item that fits those descriptions. Klein sighed inwardly. There was no question about helping Little Sun. There were many monsters in the forsaken land of the gods, where the City of Silver was located, allowing the collection of several materials which were rare in the northern and southern continents. In addition, they had the contiguous history that wasn't distorted by any of the deities or churches. They gave the most objective stories and secrets prior to the cataclysm, and the knowledge involved was extremely valuable. Whether it was from the perspective of the Tarot Club's leader, or simply considering his own interests, Klein had no intention of giving up Little Sun or the City of Silver unless it was hopeless. However, there were certain things which weren't suitable for Mr. Fool to voice out. Just as Audrey was looking expectantly at Mr. Fool, who was shrouded in a thick grey fog, the world, who had been silent all this time, finally opened his mouth. I have an item that contains the mental corruption of the True Creator. He was referring to the old black eye that Nimbrite Master Osego had left behind. An item containing the mental corruption of the True Creator, Alger thought as he organized his words. This might be able to help the Sun. Once those exploratory team members, whose thoughts and viewpoints have been warped, sense the mental imprint of the True Creator, there's a high possibility that they will mutate right on the spot. The world looked at the Sun and laughed hoarsely. Kid, I can lend you that item, but what will you be using to pay for it? Having seen Hope, Derek's mind raced, suddenly remembering what had happened during previous gatherings, and quickly said, I can help you find the characteristics of the human-skinned shadow, the mutated pituitary gland and blood of a thousand-faced hunter. I can also attempt to obtain the method to removing the mental corruption on an item left behind by a rampager. Whichever I get first will be used as payment. Out of all of the options, the human-skinned shadow was relatively easy to encounter. It was one of the scarier monsters in the depths of the darkness. At this moment, Derek wasn't considering whether the exchange was of equal value or not. Even though a one-time loan of an item contaminated by the True Creator was obviously not worth as much as the conditions he put forward, under the current circumstances, he could grit his teeth and accept whatever high price the world offered. Thus, he might as well proactively show his sincerity. The world nodded slightly. Very good, I will ask for Mr. Fool's help to lend it to you. As he spoke, he revealed the shape of the all-black eye and added, it's the equivalent of a sequence 5 Beyonder. If you lose it, you'll have to provide me with compensation. Also, as soon as this is over, return it to me. This was what Klein couldn't say in his capacity as the Fool. If a god-level existence like him kept harping about compensation and remembered to return it to me, then status he had built up for himself would have collapsed. In addition, Klein took into account the hidden dangers that lay in the future. The all-black eye and the other items were all things that he had used in the real world. If he were to bring in a new member who knew of this matter, they could confirm certain matters based on this point. Therefore, allowing Sherlock Moriarty to be equivalent to the world was clearly better than having Sherlock Moriarty be equivalent to the Fool. When your strength doesn't match your status, all I can do is tremble in fear, as if I were treading on thin ice or facing the abyss. Klein sighed silently. Seeing that Mr. Fool hadn't refused the world's request, nor did he point out any problems with the deal, Derek was relieved and quickly agreed to all the demands. At the same time, Audrey was genuinely happy for Little Sun. Alger thought for a while before letting out a sigh. He then said to the Sun in a measured tone, don't be too optimistic. How to seize this opportunity still needs to be organized. First, you have to choose a time and, without putting yourself in danger, have only one exploratory team member be present while there are several City of Silver citizens. Or when they're all in a quarantined and sealed state, you have to use a wall of spirituality to seal the vessel that stores the corrupted item ahead of time and not allow anyone to notice it. By doing that, you can control the development of the situation. In addition, you need to consider how to hide that item after it's over. You mustn't let the 6-member council discover it, otherwise, you'll never be able to clear the suspicion on you. If such an easily deceived fellow were to die, it would be difficult for me to obtain any more information regarding the forsaken land of the gods or the secrets of the ancient era. The Hanged Man didn't find it problematic to offer help. Under his tutelage, Derek gradually had a complete plan and a few key points to take note of. Thank you, Mr. Hanged Man. Thank you to all of you. He sincerely expressed his gratitude to every member in the gathering. This made Audrey feel the satisfaction of doing a good deed. The matter of the Sun came to an end at this point, and Force, who had witnessed it all, suddenly had an idea. She ruffled her slightly curled long hair and said, I wish to know which family the apprentice pathway belongs to. I'm willing to use one of the chapters in the Sights in the Spirit World as about her. Although the content is considered the ravings of a dreamer, many of the things described in it are true from my experiences into the spirit world. The Sights in the Spirit World was one of the mysticism notebooks that Mrs. Orlisa had left her. The logic of the content was incoherent, absurd, and just reading it alone left one irritable. However, when her body entered and left the spirit world 3 times for a variety of reasons, Force discovered that the records in the notebook might not necessarily just be ravings. Sights in the spirit world? Klein leaned back slightly as he controlled the world to answer before the Hanged Man. I know the answer, and I can give you some of the corresponding information for free. He knew very well that the Hanged Man could also answer the magician's questions. It's bad to have competition. That's why you need to combine it with free gifts, Klein silently hand-palmed. All right, Force felt a surge of joy. She discovered that the Tarot Club really was much more high-end than the other Beyonder circles that she had participated in before. Many difficult questions could be answered here. At this moment, the world asked in a low voice, do you want to hear the answer for yourself or have everyone else hear it too? Force pondered for a few seconds, then caught Audrey and the others by surprise with her answer. Just say it out here. In her opinion, the answers to her own questions were of little help to others, and it didn't matter if they found out, and if Mr. World had left something out, or gave an incomplete description, and someone else happened to know the corresponding content, then she would be able to use the same sites in the Spirit World chapter to obtain the full picture. She believed that it was more important that way. The world wasn't surprised and said in a low and hoarse voice, in the fourth epoch, the apprentice pathway was wielded by the Abraham family. Later, it was spread to the Tamara family, which had been in marriage alliances with it for extended periods of time. In the fifth epoch, which is the present epoch, the Theosophy Order also has the apprentice and trick master potion formulas. They're widely believed to be related to the Abraham and Tamara families. Of course, there are also people who suspect that the Theosophy Order is actually a guise of the Demoness sect. Considering that Miss Magician had already met with members of the Abraham family, Klein added via the world, it is said that the Abraham family has suffered a bloodline curse all this time. They have no choice but to take up residence separately from each other in order to avoid danger. Bloodline curse. Force's eyes widened as she thought of her encounters. Mrs. Orlice's husband belonged to the Abraham family, and that Mr. Lawrence is also a part of the Abraham family. Is that why she said that as long as one isn't a member of the family clan, they wouldn't suffer the curse? However, I used the bracelet, and it belongs to the Abraham family. Once again, regret gnawed at her soul. This was the first time that Alja and Audrey was hearing about the bloodline curse of the Abraham family. Both of them had their own thoughts, so no one spoke up for a short period of time. After a while, Force took a deep breath and said, "Thank you, Mr. World. You have answered the biggest question I have. I will copy the first chapter of the sites in the Spirit World after the end of this gathering and sacrifice it to Mr. Fool. Is that okay, Mr. Fool? The magician is a descendant of the Abraham family. It's no wonder her body can enter and exit the Spirit World. She likely possesses a corresponding mystical item." The Hanged Man suddenly looked at her. Force is a member of the Abraham family. She was born in an ancient family dating back to the fourth epoch. Audrey nodded as if she was thinking about something. After receiving a positive reply from Mr. Fool, Force relaxed and began mentioning her desire to buy the Beyonder ingredients, stomach pouch of a spirit eater and the blood of a deep-sea marlin. Unfortunately, the sun wasn't going out during this period of time, so there was nothing. As for the Hanged Man, he merely mentioned that he had clues to the deep-sea marlin's blood. No one had obtained the formula for the Wind-Blessed potion yet. On the other hand, Audrey wasn't in a hurry to purchase the psychiatrist formula because she was about to join the psychology alchemists. Klein originally wanted to sell either the werewolf beyond the characteristic or biological poison bottle, but after considering the latter's compatibility with his spirit-body state and the current financial situation of the members, he temporarily gave up on that idea. The transaction segment quickly ended, and the gathering reached the stage where each of them could share information they had heard about. Audrey slowly looked around and said with a slight smile, "Last week, an interesting case happened in Bagland. The protagonist is called the hero bandit Dark Emperor. Dark Emperor." The Hanged Man, who was casually listening to Miss Justice, suddenly raised his head. His gaze suddenly became sharp and piercing. He had just learned that the card in Mr. Fool's hand was one of the cards of blasphemy created by Emperor Zell. The name of the card was Dark Emperor. Does this have to do with Mr. Fool? Algy quickly glanced at the end of the long bronze table, before immediately lowering his head. If it was really done by Mr. Fool's adorer, this definitely isn't a simple matter. Algy listened attentively to Miss Justice's subsequent descriptions. Force, who had long since learned of this from Xio and had some predictions about it, also gave the Fool a glance. She wanted to see the truth from the concealed entity's reaction, but the Fool remained as calm as ever in the thick grey fog. Audrey, who wasn't able to glean anything either, paused for a moment, then continued. The victim is a tycoon, Capan. Many rumors point to him being the biggest human trafficker in Bagland. Hero bandit Dark Emperor infiltrated his villa and robbed him of his life, rescuing many innocent girls who were locked up in his underground dungeon. When Capheim's corpse was discovered, it was covered with a deck of tarot cards. His face was covered with the cards, Judgment and the Emperor. She didn't mention the safe as she found it unimportant. Covered with tarot cards, is that the symbol for when our tarot club takes action? Wait a minute, a human trafficker? Alger sharply noticed the phrase. He turned to the end of the long bronze table and humbly asked, "Mr. Fool, is Capheim related to the disappearance of the colonial slaves?" The latter was a mission had been assigned to him by the Church of the Lord of Storms, and he had formally targeted a suspect named Bellin and had asked Backland residents, Justice, the magician, and the world, to keep an eye out for him. As a result, upon hearing the word human trafficker, Alger intuitively believed that it had something to do with the disappearance of many tribes on the southern continent and the flight of many slaves from many islands in the Sonia Sea. He felt that only a matter such as this, which seemed to hold some secrets, could interest Mr. Fool. Of course, it cannot be ruled out that it was an independent act by Mr. Fool's adorer. He couldn't possibly be waiting for everything to be arranged like a manipulated puppet, Alger thought. Capheim has something to do with the recent disappearance of the colonial slaves. On second thought, that's not a possibility that can be eliminated. There were 4 Beyonders in his villa, and that in itself isn't normal in the first place even if a tycoon like him were to hire Beyonder bodyguards. Then he would only be able to get a sequence 7 and 2 sequences 8 seconds or 9 seconds at most. Back then, Harris, together with his mystical items, was equivalent to a sequence 5 expert. The Hanged Man's words jolted Klein's thoughts as he felt that the matter could vaguely be linked together. However, he wasn't sure about his theory, and he could only disregard the Hanged Man's question. He chuckled and said, "My adorer made some minor contributions in this matter." As expected, Audrey's eyes shone brightly as she cheered in her heart. As expected, it's the first time that I encountered anything to do with the Tarot Club in real life. Force was half happy and half wistful. Alger believed that Mr. Fool's words were an indirect confirmation of his conjecture. Capine was definitely not a simple human trafficker. Otherwise, he wouldn't have caused the hidden existence as Adora to take action. Therefore, there was a strong correlation between the human trafficking and the disappearance of the slaves. Both were matters that weren't simple. Without waiting for Miss Justice to speak, Klein lightly tapped his finger on the edge of the ancient long table and leisurely added, "He obtained two beyond the characteristics from this matter and wishes to sell them as quickly as possible. The two characteristics correspond to sequence 8 Sheriff, and the other is sequence 7 Interrogator. Sheriff, Interrogator, and those from the Arbiter pathway, which is controlled by the Augustus family. Only members of the royal family, ancient nobles, and the military could possibly acquire them. Capine had one of them backing him. Not excluding the possibility of the Phenepotter Kingdom's Castilla family. Alger frowned, feeling that the disappearance of the slaves wasn't as simple as it seemed. Audrey's thoughts were similar to his. She had never thought that the Beyonders at Capine's villa would be from the Arbiter pathway. It's impossible that the faction in control of the corresponding formulas would collude with a human trafficker like Capine. Audrey pursed her lips slightly, puzzled and confused. Sheriff Force, who knew that her good friend, Xio, was saving up for the potion ingredients for this sequence, sat up hurriedly and asked in puzzlement, "Mr. Fool, what are beyond the characteristics?" "That's not what I expected. Shouldn't you directly ask me how much it is?" "That's right. I don't think I've ever told Miss Magician about the law of beyond the characteristics indestructibility and conservation." Klein was taken aback for a moment. And then he began to consider his tone. And at that moment, Audrey spoke out on his behalf. "Mr. Fool, may I answer the question?" "The corresponding payment shall be paid directly to you." She and Force are friends, and she had volunteered out of the fear that Mr. Fool wouldn't share that knowledge again. "No problem." Klein smiled in response. "Miss Justice is always able to worry about the things that trouble me," he sighed with emotion inwardly. Phew. Audrey breathed a silent sigh of relief and turned to face Force. She deliberately didn't use the pronunciation and unique vocabulary of a noble to say, "Do you want to know the answer? What are you willing to pay?" Force nodded without hesitation. "Of course." She looked at the figure shrouded in grey fog and respectfully asked, "Mr. Fool, can I use another chapter of the Sights in the Spirit World as payment?" She specifically emphasized another because she knew that the chapter she would give to Mr. World would be first sacrificed to Mr. Fool, and the knowledge that could be viewed at any time didn't seem to have any value for a transaction. It wasn't to say that she suspected that a mighty figure like Mr. Fool would peak. She just felt that it was more sincere to change the chapter. Sometimes, a mighty figure only cares about your attitude. Force had read such things in many novels. Leaning back in his chair, Klein replied in an unconcerned tone, "Sure." "Thank you, Mr. Fool," Force said, unable to suppress her smile. She instinctively believed that she had come into contact with certain secret high-level knowledge. Audrey was completely relieved as she smiled faintly. In the Beyonder world, there is a law. Remember, it's a law. In similar pathways, the total beyond the characteristics are conserved, never reducing or increasing. It will only move from one entity to another, changing from one form to another. Therefore, after the death of the Beyonder, the characteristics will be separated and become equivalent to the main ingredient of a potion. Oh, apart from the remains of rampages. There are too many latent troubles with those, so they can only be made into items. After the death of the Beyonder, the characteristics will be separated and become equivalent to the main ingredient of a potion. In that instance, it was as if lightning flashed through Force's mind, allowing her to understand many things. It turns out that the remains Mrs. Orlisa left me was her Beyonder characteristic. It turns out that in the eyes of others, every Beyonder is equivalent to walking ingredients. That's really dark. Force clenched her fists tightly, feeling that the Beyonder world was essentially filled with madness. However, she didn't feel disgusted by the fact that she had become a Beyonder because she had consumed the Beyonder characteristics left behind by Mrs. Orlisa. Instead, it gave her a faint sense of warmth. After losing her mother, before she met Xio, Mrs. Orlisa was the person who treated her the best. For Force, it was a sad but warm experience for her to inherit Mrs. Orlisa's remains and be with her forever. So that's the case. The law of beyond the characteristics indestructibility and conservation, that means the characteristic left behind by a Sheriff Beyonder is equivalent to all the main ingredients. Force asked an additional question to verify her thoughts. Yes, Audrey also thought of Xio. Force immediately stood up and bowed to the mysterious existence that was looking down at everything. "Mr. Fool, can you get your Adora to reserve the Sheriff's corresponding beyond the characteristic? I wish to buy it, but I temporarily lack the funds. Please give me another week, is that fine?" "Sure." Klein took on an attitude as though he didn't care. Force heaved a sigh of relief and quickly asked, "How much does your Adora wish to receive in gold pounds?" "The price of a corresponding sequence 8 Beyonder ingredient is around £300. Klein smiled. £600. After naming the price, he immediately switched topics, showing that he didn't care about the sequence 8 Beyonder characteristic. He looked around and conjured a few goatskin parchments. "This is the meaning of a portion of Roselle's secret symbols. It's considered free knowledge, making it easier for you to collect the diary entries in the future." The information included numbers and dates. The reason why Klein had taught the members of the Tarot Club this information was that he was afraid that they would later end up buying counterfeits. With the knowledge of dates, they'll be able to eliminate most counterfeits. Klein chuckled inwardly. Audrey and the others were pleasantly surprised, never expecting to gain such knowledge. Although they had already discovered that the secret symbols on the goatskin were the simplest ones, they all believed that this was a good start. With the first time, there would be a second time and the third time. After a short exchange, Klein said in a gentle tone, "Let us end today's gathering here." "By your will." Audrey, Alger, and the others stood up at the same time and bowed. The crimson rays of light dissipated, and the ancient palace above the grey fog returned to its former tranquility. Only Klein was left sitting alone on the high-backed chair belonging to the Fool. After returning to the real world, Force sat at her desk and lost herself in thought about the Abraham family for a while. She had a whole new understanding of the few words mentioned in the mysticism notebooks she had. So that's how it is. It's no wonder Mrs. Orlisa didn't wish to inform Mr. Lawrence of her and her husband's death. Now that I think about it, The Abraham family is really pitiful and sad, Force muttered a few sentences to herself before rummaging and taking out sights in the spirit world from a pile of ordinary books, in preparation to copy the first and second chapters. For this, she entered cogitation and adjusted her breathing in order to be in her optimal condition. Otherwise, just copying the contents of sites in the spirit world would bring her mania and confusion. The words clearly didn't have any spirituality, but once they were combined together to describe those ridiculous scenes, it was as if they had the ability to affect her emotions. I need to take a 5-minute break after every 5 minutes of copying it. I don't want to lose control. Because of this, Force took out her small, intrinsic pocket watch and placed it diagonally in front of her desk. In the Berg household in the City of Silver. Derek woke up as a flash of lightning which illuminated everything flashed in his eyes. He looked around, but he didn't feel like he was being monitored. But the Hanged Man's precise description of the prior events, through reasoning and his deep confidence, convinced him that his conjecture was correct and that there had to be one or more Beyonders with particular powers that were secretly monitoring him at that very moment. Besides, Mr. Fool didn't deny it. Derek got out of bed and stretched his body like he usually did. During this process, the analysis and suggestions that the Hanged Man had given him rapidly surfaced in his mind. Up till now, no one has come looking for you or has chosen to throw you into the dungeons. That's enough to tell us that your chief and the other elders of the 6-member council are still leaning towards observing. They wish to find a way of evacuating the entire City of Silver out of the Forsaken Land through Aemon, the first person they've encountered in more than 2,000 years. So, if you don't do anything out of line, they definitely wouldn't rouse you so that Aemon wouldn't notice anything amiss. As such, their surveillance wouldn't be too close, physically, at least not when you're awake. And because of this, they probably didn't discover that you've already coughed out that worm of time. Their subsequent reactions are enough to indirectly prove this. Similarly, they should only be able to observe what kind of ritual you held, but they won't be able to figure out who you're praying to. If it were me, I would definitely suspect that it was related to Aemon. Due to the above reasons, you can openly hold the bestowment ritual. After all of this, you can push the blame onto Aemon. Of course, you have to pretend to be sufficiently cautious and careful. You have to be prepared to undergo the examination of a psyche analyst and other Beyonders of other sequences when everything is over. Regarding this matter, you can seek Mr. Fool for help. With the Hanged Man's suggestion, Derek walked around the table twice, carefully closed the window, lit a candle, and set up a bestowment ritual. Above the grey fog, within the towering, ancient palace, Klein was staring idly at the stone pillars that supported the dome, feeling that the building he had built resembled an Athens temple. Is it because of my own subconscious? His thoughts wandered. At that moment, the dark red star corresponding to the sun began to emit light, and it quickly dispersed the ripples to form an illusory and mysterious door. Above the grey fog, a small amount of power was stirred up as it flowed like water. Upon hearing the stacked pleas, Klein lowered his head and looked at the all-black eye placed in front of him. Let's hope little son doesn't lose this. Otherwise, Mr. World would have to be gloriously sacrificed. It was precisely because he had the all-black eye that Klein, who wasn't an Imbright master, could secretly control the world as a fake person, allowing him to act as if he was made of flesh and blood. Once the item was lost, he would have to let the world die to prevent the magic from getting exposed. While sighing, Klein emanated his spirituality, stirring the power of the fog into flowing towards the illusory door, forcefully pushing it open slightly and stabilizing the transmission channel. Soon after, he placed the all-black eye into an iron box and threw it into the gap of the mysterious door. He casually said, "Do not touch the item inside." After doing all this, he didn't stay any longer, because he knew that little son wouldn't be able to find an opportunity to take action that quickly. And he was unsure when Miss Magician would be able to finish copying the 2 chapters of Sights in the Spirit World. Relaxing his spirituality, Klein's figure disappeared from the space above the grey fog. In the Berg household in the City of Silver. As soon as Derek saw an iron black box on the altar, he heard Mr. Fool's familiar voice, "Do not touch the item inside." Do not touch. Derek made a note of this reminder and decided to carry it out to a T. After thanking the Fool and Mr. World and ending the bestowment ritual, he opened the box with extraordinary care and examined the contents. It was a completely black eye without a pupil. Just looking at it threw his mind into chaos, and his thoughts became sluggish. Faint, indistinct, and seemingly crazy ravings sounded in his ears. After a sudden shiver ran through his body, Derek closed the lid of the iron box, picked up a silver dagger, and completely sealed the iron box with a wall of spirituality. Then, he put the iron box into a secret pocket on the inside of his clothes, fixed the axe of hurricane in place and left the room, heading straight for the training field. The exploratory team members were still under the disguised quarantine. However, Derek had no plans to take action today. He carefully followed Mr. Hanged Man's instructions and planned to observe the situation first and patiently wait for an opportunity. Of course, if there was a good opportunity, he would have to act decisively. Upon entering the training field, Derek circled around the exploratory team's area and saw that they were gathered in groups of 2 or 3, whispering to each other. But once they noticed that someone was watching, they would immediately stop and stand there in silence. At times, they would take a few steps, like zombies that had just crawled out of the darkness. What would they do if I removed the wall of spirituality now and allowed them to sense the feelings emanated by Mr. World's item? Will they turn their heads at the same time to look at me? Derek imagined the scene of everyone turning their heads and looking at him with cold and emotionless eyes, and he felt a baffling, indescribable fear. He drew a breath and told himself to be patient, to wait, and not to panic. City of Silver, at the top of the spire, in a room that belonged to the chief. Demon Hunter Kalinariat, who was resting his mind with his eyes closed, looked towards a dark corner. A human figure stood up from the ground with a twisted posture. It swayed slightly and said with a voice that sounded like metal abrasions, "Your Excellency, Derek Berg has held another ritual. According to my observation, it's likely to be a bestowment request ritual. It's very similar to the sacrificial rituals we usually hold, but what's different is that he received a response and was given an iron black box. I couldn't exactly see what was inside, but it gave me a very evil and dangerous feeling. At this point, the shadow urgently pleaded, Your Excellency, it's definitely directed by that mysterious person. We have to take action and not let this continue unheeded. Otherwise, Derek Berg will summon an evil god or a similar existence sooner or later, destroying the entire city of Silver. Colin's expression became unusually grave. He stood up and slowly paced up and down, saying, Let's wait a little longer. Up till now, we still haven't figured out the purpose of that mysterious person who called himself Eamon. We don't understand why he only sent one avatar to the City of Silver after discovering it, as well as the goal of patiently staying in the underground dungeons for 42 years. If his intention is solely to destroy us, he wouldn't have done such incomprehensible actions. Just wait a little longer. This might be our hidden hope, the hope for us in surviving the apocalypse when it comes. Just as he finished his sentence, a bolt of lightning flashed past the window, illuminating the pitch-black sky in the gloomy room. When it was almost evening, Klein finally received Miss Magician's prayer and obtained the first 2 chapters of Sights in the Spirit World through the sacrificial ritual. When he sat in the seat that belonged to the fool, he leisurely flipped through the copied notebook, and he read them, line by line. He was stunned to find himself turning increasingly irritable. What's happening? Those words clearly don't contain any spirituality, and the paper is ordinary as well. It couldn't be a sealed artifact, so how can it affect my state of mind? Furthermore, I'm above the grey fog, a fog that can even sever the influence of a true god. Klein frowned, leaned back, and carefully recalled the information in the Book of Secrets, which had similar phenomena. Not long after, he roughly understood the reason. When certain existences were described in detail, even if it was written in text form, it would still affect the reader's thoughts and psyche. Amongst them, the scariest were records related to true gods. A book explaining a particular god in detail would cause every reader to go crazy, or even distort their ideologies. As for Beyonders, there was a high chance of them losing control. Sights in the Spirit World was written by a certain ancestor of the Abraham family. He had recorded all the strange and wonderful things that happened when he travelled through the Spirit World. In the first chapter, he described the lights in the Spirit World. He believed that the 7 rays of pure light of different colors contained the limitless knowledge of different domains, and that no matter where the travelers were in the Spirit World, they would be able to see them blanketing higher elevations. What was even more surprising was that these 7 rays of light were alive. They were like spirit bodies that lingered there. In the field of mysticism, many of the secret deed rituals were actually aimed at the 7 pure lights, and through their secret connections, they allowed one to gain a certain amount of knowledge. Therefore, many mysticism experts called the 7 pure lights master or teacher. In response to this, the 7 pure lights seemed very happy. They had even pulled quite a few spirit world creatures to form a secret organization that specialized in teaching people, the Great White Brotherhood. In the second chapter, the traveler from the Abraham family recorded his encounter with the yellow light, Venethon. Relying on the power of the mysterious space above the grey fog, Klein quickly recovered a good state of mind and continued to read the second chapter of the Sights in the Spirit World. The traveler of the Abraham family, the owner of the notebook, claimed that when he wandered into the depths of the spirit world, he met an elder dressed in lemon-yellow robes. The elder's body was translucent and was abnormally similar to the surrounding creatures of the spirit world, but his attitude was surprisingly amiable. The traveler from the Abraham family conversed with the elder for a while, and he was surprised to find out that the elder was actually one of the 7 pure lights that blanketed the spirit world at the highest elevation, yellow light Venethon. Venethon told the traveler of the Abraham family that his own characteristics were reason and adaptation, that he was the symbol of astromancy, and that his corresponding gem was emerald. He made a rather anxious reference to a prophecy that came from himself. Focus as the stars fall from the cosmos, shattering the lands. Everything in the world will cease to exist. He believed that this would be the end of the world within 200 years. Nothing would be spared from this. The traveler from the Abraham family didn't have much of a reaction towards this comment. Instead, he asked how he could remove the bloodline curse of his family. Yellow light, Venethon told him that in a certain sense, it was indeed a curse, but it had a completely different nature from the curses in mysticism. The solution was in the future, in the hands of an apprentice who was assisted by a hidden existence. He also warned the traveler of the Abraham family that the day the curse was lifted was the beginning of the Abraham family's true doom. As for what the tribulation was, he said that he wasn't so sure himself. He believed that it involved a great existence on the level of gods. In the second chapter of Sights in the Spirit World, the owner of the notebook mentioned something else. Venethon mentioned another matter. The rulers of the Great White Brotherhood would often enter the real world, and through different methods, transform into humans and teach the knowledge of their respective domains. Since the 5th epoch, many of the mentor-level characters of different domains were their incarnations. For example, the greatest astrologer, D. Forceman, in the last 1,000 years had proved that their current world was a planet. He was none other than the human incarnation of yellow light, Venethon. Based on this, the owner of the notebook raised a theory. Which pure light's incarnation was Russell Gustave, who could be considered a mentor in many fields. No, he wasn't. If you really want to think like that, then he's probably a green light. Klein raised his hand and rubbed his temples. Based on this, he judged that the owner of the notebook wasn't an extremely ancient beyonder. However, judging from the fact that the person didn't address Russell as emperor, this tour of the spirit world had likely taken place during a period when Russell was still a consul, or when his proclamation as an emperor was still not widely recognized. Of course, it didn't prevent the possibility that beyonders of the Abraham family refused to recognize any emperor other than the Tudor emperor. A traveler who can roam the spirit world. It must be quite a high sequence. If he were a high-sequence beyonder, Mr. Dorr would have long been rescued, and the so-called bloodline curse would no longer exist. Thus, the owner of the diary would be a sequence 5 beyonder, or a sequence 6 with a mystical item, although the Abraham family has declined. They aren't weak-eyed. Why is yellow light, Venethon's prophecy, similar to that of the Demonesh sect and the Aurora Order? The apocalypse is coming, from the period that I predicted. The apocalypse should only be 2 to 3 decades from now. Klein frowned as he thought. Russell became consul in 1173, and it was currently November 1349, 176 years away, and Yellow Light Venethon had predicted back then that it would be within 200 years. Considering the fact that Klein had only made an estimate of the period interval, it was possible that he was 24 to 50 years from the apocalypse. Russell proclaimed himself as emperor in 1192 and was assassinated in 1198. Although the first 2 chapters of Sights in the Spirit World didn't provide any practical knowledge, it had thoroughly opened up his sights, allowing him to understand the situation of the spirit world to a certain extent, as well as the existence of the 7 pure lights and the Great White Brotherhood. So, when advancing, the pure lights seen at extremely high elevations after transforming into a spirit body state and holding the corresponding ritual are the pure lights of the spirit world. Furthermore, they are alive with their own thoughts. How miraculous. The first 2 chapters of Sights in the Spirit World are completely lacking practical knowledge. At the very least, I know that Yellow Light's real name is Venethon and that his corresponding gem is Emerald. I got to learn a lot of detailed information, and I can use this to design secret deed rituals that point towards him, but for the time being, it wouldn't be of much use. Klein thought for a moment, then he closed the copied notebook and returned to the real world. He had more important things to do instead of communicating with Yellow Light Venethon. Klein took out a piece of paper, raised his pen, and wrote a letter to the inventor, Leopard, asking what stage of the patent approval process the bicycle was, why it hadn't been successful, and if he needed a lawyer to help him. With the establishment of the magician's rules, the thorough digestion of the potion wouldn't take him more than 2 months, and he had to save up as quickly as possible for the corresponding costs of the Beyonder ingredients that are needed for him to advance to a faceless. Of these, the Sun might be able to offer one item for free because of the all-black eye, but the other item required Klein to figure it out for himself. As far as he knew, the corresponding Beyonder ingredients for Sequence 6 were all over £1,500 and were typically in a situation where demand stripped supply. In addition to the 2 main ingredients, the supplementary ingredients included the blood of a thousand-faced hunter and the hair from a deep sea nugget. These 2 items were extremely rare and rich in spirituality, making them expensive. Earning money really is difficult, but spending it is easy. If only I could sell the werewolf and interrogate beyond the characteristics. I can't even waste a single penny or so. Klein sealed the envelope and adhered a stamp on it. He knew how much he had without even needing to count. £624 in notes and 5 £1 gold coins, plus 7 solid notes and some copper pennies. Right, Miss Magician will pay £600 for the sheriff beyond the characteristic meant for Miss Xio. I hope they can raise the money as soon as possible. Klein silently cheered the 2 ladies on. You're telling me that beyond the circle you recently joined has both Beyonder ingredients of the sheriff potion, and the price is very reasonable. £600 for all of it. Xio widened her eyes as she delivered the barrage of questions. She had just come back from Eastborough to find out who had recently been keeping tabs on Capan. Yes, he's a very reputable seller. The only problem is that the verification process for joining is very strict, so I won't be able to rope you in for a short period of time. What Force said was entirely the truth. That's great. Xio didn't suspect her friend, but she took 2 excited steps forward. Suddenly, her expression sank. But I don't have enough money. The corners of Force's lips twitched as she asked, how much do you have now? Counting the £30 deposit received from this job, a total of £310, so I'm still short of half. Xio scratched her short blonde hair. Let me think of where I can borrow £300. The bank won't give a bounty hunter like me a loan, and those usuries of way too much interest. Perhaps Miss Audrey? She had heard from her friend that she had recently bought the Trickmaster potion recipe for £450, so she had no intention of borrowing money from Force. Why are we all so poor? Force couldn't help but sigh. Miss Audrey rarely comes out these days. She seems to be busy with other things, and borrowing money from her isn't always a timely thing to do. We can try Viscount Blaine first. If it's too late, then I'll help you pay for the rest. I have £430. That's enough. Xio blinked her eyes and suddenly lowered her head. She said in a heavy voice, Force, you're the best. When I advance to sheriff, I'll earn even more money. Force smiled and shook her head. So, why don't you do the cleaning today? How about that? City of Silver. Derek left the training field and returned home. He had just inquired about when the exploratory team members would be released from quarantine, and he had received the answer when the lightning calms today. Sitting down at an ancient wooden table, Derek considered the plan again, remembering Mr. Hangman's reminder. If there's no suitable audience to testify for you, then you might as well use the Beyonder who's monitoring you. But how do I know when I'm being monitored? Mr. Hangman said it with great certainty, but he wasn't detailed enough. Many questions arose in Derek, but he couldn't find a way to verify them. Although he felt embarrassed to ask Mr. Fool for guidance on this question, upon considering the fact that this matter was related to the survival of the City of Silver, he mustered his courage. He spoke the name of the Fool in a low voice, and he briefly described the difficulties he had encountered. After a while, he saw Mr. Fool sitting in the middle of the endless grey fog. He heard a concise reply, touch the item in the iron box. Do not exceed 3 heartbeats. Prepare yourself in advance. Pay attention to the origins of the black lines. That's simple. Derek thanked Mr. Fool in pleasant surprise. He adjusted his posture and quietly put his hand into the inside pocket of his clothes. As the wall of spirituality was lifted, Derek's fingers pushed open the iron box and carefully probed inside. Suddenly, he touched an ice-cold item, and the black illusory lines appeared in front of his eyes. At the same time, his mind buzzed, as if an illusory roar was tearing through his ears. Derek's body convulsed, and tears and snot streamed down his face due to the pain. He almost forgot what he had to do, but fortunately, in the limits of his vision, he saw the illusory black lines converge. In that dark corner, there appeared to be a shadow. Derek withdrew his hand at once, as though he had touched a red-hot soldering iron. He collapsed to the ground and began to twitch as if he had been struck by lightning. His mouth couldn't close at all, and saliva constantly dripped from it. It took nearly a minute for Derek to recover, close the box again, and seal it with a wall of spirituality. He stood up and took a sip of cold water, already aware that someone was monitoring him at that very moment. After an unknown period of time, Derek suddenly heard a knock on the door. "Who is it?" he asked, slightly at a loss. A jovial voice came from outside. "It's me, Dark. The exploratory team has been removed from quarantine. Weren't you interested in knowing about our experience this time, Dark?" The image of Dark appeared in Derek's mind. He was of medium height, slightly plump, and strong. He was an optimistic, cheerful teenager who often beamed with a friendly smile. He was a classmate during general education and a teammate of the patrol squad. But after this exploration of the fallen creator's half-destroyed temple, he had become reserved and merely smiled at everyone. Once he recalled Dark reagents' changes, Derek couldn't help but quiver as he felt a chill down his spine. Why did he suddenly come looking for me? Shouldn't he be heading home after being removed from quarantine? At that moment, many questions arose in Derek's mind. Suddenly, he thought of a possibility. Elder Lavia knows that I've suspected that something abnormal had happened to them, so she sent Dark to deal with me. Derek was first shocked and filled with horror. But immediately following that, he felt that it might not be a bad thing. Mr. Hanged Man said, "If there isn't a suitable audience to testify for you, then you might as well use the Beyonder who's monitoring you, and now, the person monitoring me is in that corner. If Dark were to suddenly attack me, then he would definitely expose the fact that there's something wrong with him. This way, even if I don't use Mr. World's item, I can still make things go smoothly." Derek turned his head to look out the window. At that moment, the frequency of the lightning had dropped to its nadir. Only after a minute or two would a bolt of lightning streak across the sky, illuminating half the sky. The entire world and most of the city of Silver was immersed in a deep darkness most of the time. If he were alone, Derek wouldn't have searched for a candle to light. He liked to lie quietly in bed and think about all sorts of things. Of course, he knew that this was actually rather dangerous. If there was no light to dispel the darkness, then monsters could suddenly appear, even within the city of Silver. However, Derek was a light suppliant himself, so he came equipped with the attribute of light and wasn't afraid of something similar happening. Knock, knock, knock. Dark knocked 3 more times, as if urging the master of the house to open the door. He wasn't like that before. He was very polite. Derek suddenly felt a deep sense of sorrow. He took out a candle from a wooden box and placed it in the middle of the table. He then rubbed his fingers, creating a golden flame. The flame lit the candle, filling the room with a faint but warm glow, and this was accompanied by a faint, pungent aroma. The candles in the city of Silver were mainly made from the fat and oil refined from the bodies of monsters. They would have different smells due to their different origins. After taking a deep breath, Derek walked to the door with a strong sense of vigilance and opened it. "What took you so long?" Dark asked with a smile. "I was looking for candles," Derek replied. He didn't dare to leave his back to the other party, and he chose to walk side by side with Dark. With his classmate and teammate, he walked back to the table and took their respective seats. "Do you want to try some of these recently dried doom fruits?" Dark asked with a smile as he removed a small cloth bag from his waist. Doom fruits were one of the very rare snacks in the city of Silver. It came from a plant called the doom bloodvine, a type of organism that didn't need light to grow. It grew by absorbing the nutrients from rotten corpses. It had a tendency to attack and was considered quite a common weak monster. Every doom bloodvine had many thumb-sized black fruits, which could be eaten directly. They were crispy and sweet, but they were unable to fill one's stomach and didn't provide the necessary nutrients. They could only be used as a daily snack. The merit points received from a single petrol could be exchanged for several large bags of them. "No, there's no need." Derek shook his head cautiously. "All right then." Dark poured out a pile of black fruit from the bag, picked one up, and popped it into his mouth before noisily munching on it. Derek thought for a moment and took the initiative to ask, "Did you encounter any monsters in the underground area of the temple?" Dark stopped chewing and answered with a smile, "There were quite a few of them, but they weren't that powerful. They were easily eliminated by us. That place was destroyed for a long time, so the powerful monsters probably left a long time ago." He paused for a second, then he said with the corners of his mouth curled, "We found some strange plants at the bottom of the temple. They looked like mushrooms in the general knowledge class. They were especially bright and looked very appetizing. It's been confirmed that they're edible. They can bring about an enhancement in one's spirituality and strengthen one's body. If it's combined with roasted monsters, then it will emit an unimaginable fragrance." As he said that, he took out a palm-sized mushroom-shaped object from another small cloth bag. The stem was milky white, and the cap was bright crystalline red. It was also dotted with dark golden spots. The mere sight of the plant made Derek gulp a mouthful of saliva, as though he had been starving for days. Under the illumination of the dim candlelight, the beautiful mushroom-shaped object had an alluring luster that whet his appetite in an irresistible fashion. "Here's one for you." Dark smiled warmly. Okay, Derek almost took action immediately as he picked up the mushroom-shaped plant to stuff it into his mouth, but in the end, he forced himself to open his mouth and say, "I'll give it a try tomorrow." Dark didn't say anything else. He pushed the mushroom in front of Derek and continued to eat his doom fruits. With great difficulty, Derek moved his gaze away from the mushroom and asked, "Did you make any discoveries on this expedition?" "Yes." Dark paused his snack eating and held a black doom fruit, replying extremely seriously, "We found a lot of murals, a continuous series of murals. Do you remember that statue in the temple?" "Yes." Derek shot a glance at the mushroom and nodded. A huge cross with a naked man nailed to it while hanging upside down, and its surface was deliberately smeared with a lot of blood. Dark fiddled with the doom fruit in his hand and said, "The newly discovered murals tell us that the builders of the temple believed that the statue represented the Lord who created everything. The omnipotent and omniscient God. They believed that the Lord didn't abandon this land, but instead helped us shoulder the vast majority of our sins when the cataclysm came. Thus, turning from an upright position to upside down, from walking freely to being nailed to the cross and bleeding in our stead. God's grace knows no bounds. We are not the abandoned, but instead, the beloved chosen ones. Without the Lord bearing our sins and shedding blood in our stead, the city of silver would have been destroyed long ago. Humans would have long ceased to exist. But, in the outside world, in the Lowen Kingdom where Mr. Hanged Man, Miss Justice, and the others are located, there are no curses, no extreme darkness. No monsters lurking in darkness. We aren't the chosen ones who are beloved, Derek silently retorted inwardly. If that's true, then we just need to change the symbols and the corresponding honorific name during a ritual, and we can receive the Lord's response again, Dark went on, describing the murals under the temple and speaking of his speculations. As this went on, Derek found it increasingly difficult to resist the temptation of the mushroom. No, I mustn't eat it. If I eat it, I might end up like Dark and the others, completely corrupted by the fallen creator and become a fanatical believer even if there's someone monitoring me. They wouldn't notice anything amiss. Derek felt a surge of horror that he had to do something to extricate himself from the situation. Chased Dark away and returned the mushroom to him. However, this is equivalent to giving up on this opportunity. Derek's gaze automatically fell on the yellow candle flame that was burning quietly. I'll get you a glass of water. He quickly went through the plan he had discussed with Mr. Hanged Man and calmly stood up. Dark nodded as he threw the black thumb-sized doom fruit into his mouth, munching at it noisily. While Derek poured the water, he deliberately slowed down his actions, lowered his head, and recited the honorific name of Mr. Fool. Finally, he said, your devoted servant prays for your attention. I pray for you to take his offerings. I pray for you to open the gates to your kingdom. Whoosh! A strong gust of wind blew up inside the room as the power of nature, generated under the incantation's influence, formed clear waves. At the same time, Dark, who had just picked up a black doom fruit, suddenly raised his head and looked at Derek, who was facing him from the side. What happened? Without answering him, Derek held one hand over the axe of Hurricane and stuffed the other into his secret pocket, removing the wall of spirituality on the exterior of the iron box. Derek cast an exceptionally guarded gaze at Dark, only to see the expression of his classmate and teammate darken as bright red traces appeared in his blue eyes. In his hand, the doom fruit strangely shed its outer darkness and transformed into a seemingly pale, fleshy color. It wasn't a doom fruit, but a finger, a bloody finger, a human finger. The pile of doom fruits on the table were comprised of human fingers. The brightly colored mushroom had also changed its appearance. It was no longer as beautiful, and it no longer flowed with an appetizing luster. It was a bloody-stained scalp with short black hair. Staring at Derek, Dark opened his mouth, his voice cold and adrift. What were you doing? Backland, 15 Minsk Street. As soon as Klein, who had crawled into the warm world under his quilt, heard what sounded like a prayer from Little Sun, he struggled to get out of bed and conjured a wall of spirituality. He then took 4 steps counterclockwise and went above the grey fog. Seated in the seat that belonged to the fool, he didn't hurry to examine Little Sun's request. Instead, he made the Dark Emperor card, paper figurines, and other items appear in front of him on the long bronze table in a neatly arranged order. According to the Hanged Man's plan, the scene of the sun stimulating the mutation of the exploratory team's member would happen during a sacrificial ritual. That way, when the matter was concluded, it would be quite simple to make the object, that was borrowed from the world, disappear from the scene, wiping away all the evidence. After that, all the blame could be pushed onto Eamon. As for Mr. Fool, Klein had agreed to Little Sun's request to simplify the ritual in an uncaring manner. All that was needed to be done were the key steps. At this point, he was waiting for the prelude to the ritual to be completed so that he could respond. In the Berg household in the City of Silver. Looking at the bloody-stained scalp, Derek suddenly recalled what it previously looked like. It was a beautiful and alluring mushroom, one that he almost couldn't control himself from swallowing. The doom fruits, that Dark had shared with him and produced crisp, crunchy sounds when they were bitten into, were actually bloody pieces of human fingers with slightly pale skin. At that moment, Derek had a violent spasm in his stomach before a gush of acid surged to his throat. Resisting the urge to vomit, he quickly croaked a line of lyrics, God, please have your kingdom descend upon this land. Your enemies will disperse, and your followers will relish in joy. There was a touch of warmth and holiness in the song, and Derek felt all the discomfort of his body weaken. His spirituality also became full and lively. His courage, his strength, and his agility were all greatly enhanced by this song. That was the beyond the powers of a Sequence 9 bard. Dark stared at his former classmate and teammate singing with an increasingly dark expression. The way he spoke became more and more inhuman. What is that thing on your body? What is that thing on your body? What is that thing on your body? All of a sudden, Dark's clothes were stretched out in bungling strips, as though a nest of slithering venomous snakes was underneath them. Whoosh! Bloody strips of flesh pierced through the black skin tight clothing, and its surface had rough skin covered with hair. Strands of meat began to flail outwards, causing Dark to look like a bloody, furry hedgehog. With a swoosh, the meat strands surged towards Derek, who was still standing at his original location. Derek was a patrol squad member who had seen quite a number of monsters, so he wasn't too flustered by this situation. He twisted his waist, raised his arm, and swung the axe of Hurricane that he was already holding in his hand. Oof! The axe of Hurricane hacked down at a few bloody strands of flesh, directly splitting them in half and causing them to fall to the ground. However, because it was night time in the City of Silver, this strike didn't bring about any lightning. Even more bloody strips of flesh began to surge forward, wrapping themselves around the axe of Hurricane over and over again as they relentlessly clung to it. Seeing that his weapon couldn't be pulled back, a pure light suddenly lit up in Derek's eyes. It was as if 2 small suns had descended into the room, and his other hand was holding something close to his mouth and nose as if he was praying. Without a sound, a fiery pillar of pure light descended from the sky, striking the bloody flesh that was wound up into a ball. Dark let out an uncontrollable scream, and many bloody strips of flesh fell to the ground, charred black. They squirmed, struggling as if they were alive. The spirituality contained within these bloody strips of meat was no longer under the control of its original owner, and gradually they merged with a natural power derived from the sacrificial ritual's incantation, forming an increasingly bright pink wave. This wave surged into the dim yellow candle flame, causing the light to suddenly burgeon, forming an illusory and mysterious door. Derek had long drawn the fool's secret symbol on the candle. This was all prepared in advance. All of this constituted a simple but complete sacrifice ceremony. Cature. As the seat shattered, Dark lunged at Derek while flailing the bloody strips of meat. There was no fear or tension in his eyes, only the purest, most fervent desire. At this moment, Klein, who was above the fog, responded. With a creaking sound, the illusory door that had many strange patterns on it opened a tiny crack. Behind the crack was a deep darkness in which countless transparent and indescribable shadows resided. High above these shadows were 7 pure lights of different colors that contained endless knowledge. Above the brilliance was an endless grayish-white fog, and above it was an ancient palace that overlooked the grey fog. Suddenly, a shadow leaped out from a dark corner, covering Dark who was closest to him. Dark's flailing strips of bloody meat were all wrapped up by pitch black, viscous liquid as he seemed to turn into a cat who had entered an opaque bag. The shadow didn't stop, and it quickly extended across the ground, rushing towards Derek, who had already dodged to another location, and shouted sternly, "Stop! What are you trying to do?" As an observer, his original plan was to watch from the sidelines and record the corresponding anomalies. He would only take action to stop the two strange parties when the situation became unmanageable. But when he saw the illusory door covered with strange symbols open up with a crack, he felt intimidated by the deep, mysterious, distant, and majestic scene inside. He instinctively believed that this was related to a terrifying evil god, so he could only take hasty actions, giving orders in an attempt to forcefully interrupt Derek's attempts at performing a sacrifice to that being. However, Derek had already chosen his location to be as far from the shadow as possible. Therefore, to stop the boy who was possessed by the mysterious Amon, the shadow observer had to bypass or take down Derek Regents first. However, his choice was the latter, because of the obvious abnormality with Dark. Leaving his back to this being was an absolutely stupid move. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Derek took out the iron box from his concealed pocket and threw it towards the illusory door conjured by the candle flame, towards the crack that presented a magical scene. As the iron box disappeared, the door, that was covered in strange symbols and characteristics, closed with a clang, before quickly vanishing. At this moment, Derek remembered Mr. Hangman's words, and he deliberately warped his facial muscles and savagely moved towards the shadow. Before the shadow blanketed him, he suddenly coughed violently and covered his mouth with his hand before falling to the ground. The pitch-black shadow emanating completely covered him. The room returned to silence, but there were now 2 huge black chrysalises on the ground. After a while, the pitch-black, viscous liquid withdrew and reformed into a shadow. With the chrysalis, the silhouettes of Derek and Dark appeared once more. The former lay there unconscious, but a tiny, strange worm with 12 transparent rings dropped from his hand. The latter had already turned into a lump of flesh, squirming and roaring as it prepared to attack. Faced with this situation, the observer had no choice but to spare some of his strength and once again wrapped him up, using his shadow like black liquid to envelop Dark Regents, who had transformed into a monster. Glancing at the scattered pale fingers and the bloody scalp with short black hair, the observer couldn't help but take a deep breath. Using his beyond powers to control the shadows outside, he created tidal waves to inform the chief inside the spire. Only after doing this did he carefully examine Derek's situation and saw the strange, translucent worm. This the avatar that Amon hid in Derek's body is dead, the observer muttered in surprise. As he recalled Dark's strangeness, the terrifying mutation, and the mushroom and dung fruits, he began to have a rough idea of what had happened. Perhaps Amon was arch-enemies with the mastermind behind Dark's corruption. In order to foil the other party's ploy, Amon was willing to sacrifice his avatar. Derek's visit to the training field to observe the exploratory team and his report of them to the chief were both Amon's attempts to rid his enemy without exposing himself. The mastermind behind Dark's corruption had noticed Derek's strangeness, so he sent Dark to take control of him. The bloody scalp and fingers were props to achieve his goal. As he thought of this, the monitor suddenly agreed with the chief's concern. The apocalypse or an even greater disaster was about to befall the City of Silver. That was why the City of Silver would repeatedly encounter so many strange events and mysterious existences that lurked deep in the darkness. Inside the chief's room at the spire, the shadow recounted everything that had happened. The grizzled, facially scarred Colin Iliad nodded gently after hearing the recount. Derek, or should I say, Amon, had really prepared ahead of time. The candle with the symbol engraved on it, the evil object that can expose Dark's problem, and Derek's excuse of pouring water to whisper a prayer, as well as finally sending away the item in a sacrificial ritual, all of this indicates that the entire situation developed according to his plan. 2 questions. 1. Who does the hidden symbol on the candle refer to? Amon himself or the god behind him? 2. Why is Amon willing to expose the exploratory team's abnormality at the cost of his avatar? Is it because he's arch-enemies with the mastermind? Then, why did he stay in the City of Silver for 42 years? Could it be that he foretold this matter ahead of time? Which is why he specifically met with the exploratory team from 42 years ago and planted his avatar in them so as to foil the plans of that mastermind? He waited 42 years for that single moment. Upon hearing the chief's questions, the shadow observer suddenly said in enlightenment, "Maybe that's how it is. Your Excellency, think about it. Why would Amon patiently wait for 42 years before making Ada lose control when Derek was imprisoned beside him? It's because the foretold time was approaching, and he was in desperate need to switch to a free person that he can latch onto so as to foil the plans of that mastermind. Indeed, we were only thinking about what was different with Derek, and we didn't pay attention to the timing," the City of Silver's chief Kalin answered in thought. The Shadow Observer immediately said, "Your Excellency, please immediately lock down all members of the exploratory team. They're definitely problematic. Also Eldelavia, she has an untrivial possibility of also being corrupted." Kalin frowned and said, "Before you reported this matter to me, and even before Dark went out, Lavia came to me and told me that she suspects that the members of the exploratory team have been contaminated by something. She recommended that we secretly monitor them and if necessary, have them guard Eldahoric's inverted mausoleum. Hormick was the former chief of the City of Silver, and he had built himself a mausoleum. After that, he lived in that mausoleum, and his appearances began to slowly decrease. Finally, the doors were closed, impossible to open again." Eldelavia had long mentioned of an abnormality, the Shadow Observer asked in surprise. After receiving a positive answer, he muttered to himself, half doubtful and half relaxed, "It's good that Eldelavia doesn't have any problems. I've already sent people to lock down the members of the exploratory team, but we can't ignore any other possibilities." Chief Colin let out a sigh. "Let Ifila come to me. I'll interrogate Derek Berg together with her." In a dark and sturdy room, Derek Berg, who had feigned unconsciousness, suddenly rolled to his feet. His axe of hurricane had already been taken away by someone and sent for inspection. Every pocket on him had also been emptied out, leaving nothing behind. Derek took a breath and looked around steadily. Suddenly, his eyes lit up with two sunlight beams, causing everything in the room to be reflected clearly in his eyes. The furniture here consisted of only a table and 2 chairs. Apart from these, there was also a stone-paved floor with strange patterns on it. A half-used candle was placed on the table. This was standard issue for rooms in the City of Silver, because monsters could suddenly appear if the darkness prevailed for too long. Without any hesitation, Derek sat down and reached for the candle. Then, he broke the candle and divided it into 3 sections. One was 3/4 the length of the original piece, and the other 2 were halved from the remaining quarter. After Derek's modification, the 3 candlesticks' cores were completely exposed. He rubbed his fingers together, creating a golden flame that lit up the 3 candles. The 2 at the top represented Mr. Fool, and the remaining 1 symbolized Derek himself. After finishing his preparations, Derek didn't continue to burn the herbal powder according to the normal processes. Instead, he poured in the essential oil and leaned back, softly chanting the honorific name of the Fool, and quickly entered cogitation. He read it over and over again, monotonously, as if he were hypnotizing himself. With the help of cogitation, Derek entered a strange state where his mind was in a deep sleep and the spirituality was dispersing. He felt adrift, but also seemed to maintain a strange lucidity. His psyche kept dispersing upwards as it rose in height. This was artificial sleepwalking. Derek, with the permission of Mr. Fool, could simplify some of the unnecessary steps. Above the grey fog, within the towering, ancient palace, Klein, who was fiddling with the all-black eye, suddenly saw the crimson star that symbolized Little Sun burgeon with light, condensing into a human shadow. And the power of the mysterious space was stirred a little. Upon seeing this, he couldn't help but feel relieved. This meant that Little Sun had already completed the relatively dangerous part of the operation, and he only needed to round up the situation. Klein didn't delay, and he immediately put down the all-black eye and picked up the Dark Emperor card. He instantly rose in level and authority, forcing the stirred power in the grey fog to submit to him. Then, he picked up a paper figurine, flicked his wrist, and threw it towards the crimson star corresponding to the sun. The paper figurine and the flowing power intertwined and quickly expanded into a gigantic angel with 12 pairs of pitch-black wings. The angel pierced through the crimson light and overlapped with the illusory figure of Little Sun. It silently combusted, turning into ashes in less than a second. At this point, Klein could no longer affect the situation of the City of Silver. As for whether his angel substitute could help Little Sun pass the subsequent inquiries and investigations, he lacked absolute confidence. He could only sign Woodley. With what has to be done completed and with all the hard work put in, all you can do is wait for fate's arrangement. Hopefully, it will be a good result. In a daze, Derek saw an angel descend before him with an order that covered the heavens, wrapping him with 12 pairs of black wings. He suddenly came to his senses as 3 candles burned quietly in front of his eyes. After sincerely thanking Mr. Fool, Derek finished the ritual and extinguished the 2 candles which were part of the original quarter. Then, he pulled them out and created a bright, golden flame in his palm. Drip, drip, drip. The 2 candles quickly melted, dripping its wax onto the remaining candle or the area surrounding it. When the candle burned away completely, there was only 1 candle left on the table. It was shorter than before, but it wasn't very obvious. It seemed like it had only been burning for a short time. After removing the remaining traces, Derek extinguished the last yellow-flamed candle. He sat up in silence, staring ahead. For a long time, he didn't do anything. He was worried that the 6-member council wouldn't react fast enough, allowing the exploratory team members to corrupt more residents of the City of Silver with mushrooms and dung fruits. He was afraid that the chief and the others would find additional clues elsewhere, thwarting all his preparations. He hated those outsiders, who lurked in the depths of the darkness, constantly carrying strong malice, including Aemon and the fallen creator. He felt guilty that he had avoided the expedition without warning Dark and the rest, causing them to turn into corrupted monsters. He had painfully eliminated a classmate who could be considered a friend with his own hands. Although Derek didn't see Dark's ultimate end, he believed that a man who had transformed into that state was already no different from dead. Derek didn't know how long he waited while experiencing those mixed feelings. Midway, he even rekindled the candle. Finally, he heard the sound of the seal being removed and the door opening. Turning his head to look, he saw, with the aid of the dim yellow candlelight, a woman in a black skirt walk in. She had her hair tied up in a ponytail, and it hung down to her vest. "Man Mithla," Derek subconsciously called out. Ithla was a pretty woman, but she had wrinkles at the corners of her eyes. She smiled and nodded in response, then she walked over with light footsteps and sat down across him. "Do you have anything you wish to say?" she asked gently. Derek instinctively lifted his head and looked over, only to suddenly discover that her pupils had somehow turned into golden vertical slits. His mind went adrift as he seemed to enter a sleepwalking state. Ifla adjusted the candle flame, letting the dim yellow light completely shine on the boy's face. Her pale golden pupils became increasingly indifferent, just like an emotionless audience. Suddenly, rings after rings of faint light appeared in those pale golden vertical pupils. It seemed to form a vortex and constructed a maze. In his stupor, Derek felt himself drifting away into the endless darkness and countless bright colors. At that moment, he suddenly became clear-headed. He felt as if something had ingeniously caught him in that state of reverie. He saw the flickering yellow candlelight and Ifla sitting across him with her pale gold vertical pupils. In a corner's shadow, a grizzled chief, Elder Kalin Iliad, walked out. After nodding to the chief, Ifla asked Derek, "What have you been doing all this time?" Derek remembered his training and maintained the same state of mind as before. "I don't know. I've always been in a daze as if I was in a dream. Only occasionally will I have clearness of mind." At the same time as his reply, two complex dark green symbols appeared in Demon Hunter Kalin's eyes. Ifla continued, "Do you know that you had a conflict with dark regions?" "I only remember that we were fighting. I felt like I had seen a man hanging upside down on a cross and a man in a pointed hat and a crystal monocle." "Yes, I saw him back at the dungeon. He had opened his mouth and spoke with a smile." Derek told a long story. Ifla looked at the chief and pressed, "What did he say?" "I can't remember. I can only remember one thing he said with a smile. Fallen creator, true creator shepherd." Derek almost failed to control his excitement. He had taken such a risk just to tell the chief the name of the fallen creator, and that his shepherd was suspicious. "The fallen creator, the true creator, it matches with the content on the murals at the bottom of the temple." Kalin nodded slightly and whispered with a frown, "Shepherd." And then, Ifla's voice remained abnormally gentle. Derek answered in his stupor. After that, they clashed, and there was a lot of light, very bright lights. Then, I woke up and kept coughing. The dark green symbols in Kalin's eyes didn't fade this entire time as he motioned for Evelyn to ask about the details. Derek answered selectively, and he had pushed the blame onto Eamon according to his script. He claimed amnesia on anything that went beyond that. Finally, Ifla asked, "Where did you get the axe?" "Where did you get the Sun Pathways potion formula?" "I bought the axe from an underground market." That person was masked, and I could only tell that he was male. The Sun Pathway potion formula was left to me by my parents. They had discovered it during an expedition. Derek answered confidently. These were points of suspicion that had always been there, so the hanged man had assumed they were bound to ask them while he was questioned. Therefore, he had made Derek to repeatedly rehearse the answers. Although the City of Silver's underground market was semi-open, there were still people who tried to conceal their identities for a variety of reasons. This provided the best explanation for Derek. After Ifla finished seriously listening to him, she turned her head sideways to Demon Hunter Colin and said, "He's not lying. There's no way he can lie. I'm using the powers of Glory Crown." Kalin nodded his head and said, "In this state, he doesn't show any traces of evil, degeneration, or corruption." Discovering these traits was a special ability of a demon hunter. As a high sequence job, demon hunters were the best at concealing their movements and intentions, making it impossible for them to be detected by targets who could foretell danger. Therefore, every demon hunter was a devil's nemesis. After some thought, Kalin got up and left the room. He said to the shadow in the corner outside, "I'll release Derek later. I think he's fine for the time being. However, secretly monitor him for a while. If Eamon is able to produce 2 avatars, he might be able to create a 3rd. "Yes, Chief," the shadow responded respectfully. After Derek woke up, the interrogation chamber was empty, with only words informing him that he was free to leave. He secretly heaved a sigh of relief as he began walking out. While doing so, he thought of Mr. Hanged Man's advice, "You can't relax just like that and end up careless. The secret surveillance will definitely continue for some time, otherwise, your chief is lacking." "Yes, I can't even recite the honorific name of Mr. Fu anymore for the time being," Derek muttered to himself as he walked down the spiral staircase. As he was walking, he suddenly saw a familiar figure dressed in a purple striped black robe. It was the beautiful shepherd Elder Lavia. Her pale grey eyes swept over Derek, and a gentle smile appeared on her face. Back in her room, with an indifferent expression, Lavia walked to the desk and unfolded a piece of parchment that was made from leather. Her left hand pinched the index finger of her right hand and snapped the tip of her finger. However, not a single drop of blood dripped. It was as if her blood had been gathered onto the surface of her finger. With this finger, she drew a complex symbol on the piece of paper. It was made up of a pupil-less eye, which represented secrecy, and the contorted lines, which represented change. After careful examination, she wrapped the finger with this piece of paper, stuffed it into her mouth, and bit on it noisily before swallowing it all. With only 4 fingers left, flesh and blood suddenly squirmed around the wound on her right palm. It quickly grew into a new index finger, one that looked slightly pale. She lowered her head, looked at her palm, and whispered a phrase, "The Fool."